Hello and welcome to Train Signal. You're watching Installing VMware ESXi version 5. In this lesson, we'll start off with the ESXi installation requirements. From there, I'll cover what's new with vSphere 5 related to ESX Server before I show you how to download and install VMware ESXi version 5. After that, we'll perform the ESXi initial configuration, then install the vSphere client and show you how to successfully connect to your new ESXi server. So with that, let's get started. Before I cover the installation requirements for ESXi, I want to quickly take a moment to point out that VMware ESXi is the hypervisor. ESXi is the piece of the vSphere suite that runs directly on your hardware. It runs directly on your physical server, so it is the operating system. You don't install ESXi on top of Windows. ESXi is installed instead of Windows Server. ESXi is what talks directly to your hardware, including your network interface cards or your storage controllers. And because of that, VMware ESXi has very specific hardware requirements, unlike a typical Windows application. And that's, of course, because it's running directly on the hardware, so it needs to be able to talk to every piece of hardware that's inside your physical server. So without further delay, let's cover the ESXi installation requirements. First off, you have to have a 64-bit CPU with either Intel VT or AMD V enabled. Those are specific features of a CPU that are related to virtualization. So relatively new CPUs will have these features built in, but you still need to double check because there could be some CPUs out there that may be being sold that don't offer Intel VT or AMD V. Also, because of the 64-bit CPU requirements, you need to check your physical servers because older servers that have 32-bit CPUs aren't going to be compatible with ESXi. You need to have at least 2098 megabytes of RAM available on the physical server to run ESXi. That's the absolute minimum, but in the real world, you'll have more like 8 gigabytes or more because, keep in mind, this is the RAM that you're going to be virtualizing your servers in. You're going to be performing, let's say, a physical to virtual consolidation and consolidating all of your physical servers, or as many as you can, into this VMware ESXi host. So it's going to need a lot of RAM, but you won't need those physical servers anymore. Let's say if you're doing server consolidation or desktop virtualization, so you're able to get rid of other pieces of physical hardware. But in the case of your ESXi hosts, they're going to be some of the most powerful servers, let's say, that are running in your data center. And because you're consolidating so much on them, you'll want them to have as much physical RAM as possible. Also, you'll need either a 1 gig Ethernet or a 10 gig Ethernet controller on your physical server. 10 gig Ethernet is becoming more and more common in larger data centers, but a 1 gig Ethernet interface is going to work just fine, and those have become standard equipment on all physical servers being produced today. Moving on, new in vSphere 5, there is support for booting ESXi hosts from the Unified Extensible Firmware Interface, or the UEFI. With UEFI, you can boot systems from hard drives, from CD-ROM drives, or even from USB media. This is a brand new feature in vSphere 5, and a feature that may be beneficial to you. Also, ESXi servers can boot from disks larger than 2 terabyte, provided that the system firmware and the firmware on any add-in card that you're using supports it. Now, because ESXi runs directly on the hardware, it has very specific hardware requirements. Before you purchase hardware to run ESXi server on, you should go and check out VMware's hardware compatibility list, or what they call the HCG, the Hardware Compatibility Guide. The URL for that is vmware.com/go/HCL. Let's go check it out. So up here in the address bar, I'll just enter that URL, vmware.com/go/HCL, and that'll take me to the VMware Compatibility Guide. And if we scroll down, the first thing that we should consider here is, what are we looking for? So by default, it's systems. So systems would be the physical servers that we're going to install ESXi on. We could also be looking for I/O devices. So I/O devices would be like storage area network controllers, let's say like Fiber Channel, HBAs, or iSCSI, hardware-based initiators. Then you've got storage and SAN, you've got host and guest requirements, and then even requirements specific to VMware View. So let's say that we are considering all versions of ESX here. We want to know which servers come from HP. So we'll scroll down here to HP, and we want to know all systems they have that are compatible with VMware fault tolerance. So we can select a specific feature there like VMware fault tolerance. Also notice on the right here, we could even enter information like the amount of memory, the number of cores, or the specific models of CPUs that are in our servers, and see which versions of ESX or ESXi or even specific vSphere features are compatible with those servers. So here I'll just click Update and View Results. If we scroll down here, we can see which physical servers from HP are compatible with VMware ESXi, what version of ESXi they're compatible with, and then whether or not they're compatible with VMware fault tolerance. So here's the physical servers. It tells us the minimum server requirement, such as the CPU series, the type of system, a number of sockets, maximum amount of memory, number of cores. It tells us about the processor that would be found in that system, the version of ESX that it's compatible with, and then specific VMware fault tolerance features that they may or may not be compatible with. So this VMware compatibility guide is an extremely powerful tool that you need to be using before you purchase physical server hardware to run ESXi on. Now if we go back to our slides, I should also mention that you can even run ESXi inside VMware Workstation or Fusion, but it can only be done for testing purposes. You also need to make sure that the laptop or desktop system you're running it on has a 64-bit CPU and is AMD V or Intel VT compatible. It will also need quite a bit of RAM to be able to run ESXi, especially if you start adding other servers, let's say like a Windows virtual machine to run VMware vCenter or maybe even a virtual storage area network appliance. You should know that VMware fault tolerance has more specific hardware requirements. If you're interested in using VMware fault tolerance, you should read more about it, and in there you'll find the specific system requirements, but you can also use that VMware compatibility guide that I just showed you. And then finally, VMware Storage is going to have its own set of requirements. You saw how you can go and search the VMware compatibility guide to find storage that's certified and compatible with VMware ESXi and vSphere. So keep that in mind. The typical virtual infrastructure is made up not only of physical servers that are running ESXi, but also of some shared storage where the virtual machines are stored. New with vSphere 5, you'll find that there is no more ESX server. ESX server has been deprecated or discontinued. There is now only ESXi server, being the hypervisor that's loaded directly on the physical servers as part of vSphere. And this was something that VMware actually said was coming back when they announced vSphere 4. They said that in the future, with the next major release of vSphere, there would be no more ESX server with the Service Console. That Red Hat Linux-based Service Console required more frequent updates, and it had a larger attack surface than the very thin ESXi server. Plus, maintaining two platforms really didn't make sense for VMware. It took longer to install and boot ESX server, and it used more resources to keep that Service Console up and running. With ESXi, it is a Type 1 hypervisor just like ESX server was. It's much thinner, it requires fewer updates, it's more secure, it still has a very thin local CLI, it installs and loads super fast, something you'll see in this lesson, and you can still perform all the same advanced features that you could do in ESX on ESXi server. Now that we've covered the installation requirements for ESXi, we're ready to get started downloading it and installing it. One of the very cool things that VMware's done is that they've made the entire vSphere suite, which includes ESXi, available for a free 60-day evaluation. You can register for that evaluation and download the entire suite from vmware.com/tryvmware. Or if you have a registered license, meaning you've already purchased VMware vSphere, you can download the ESXi ISO file from vmware.com/download. By the way, ESXi is a 321 megabyte CD ISO file. You can actually burn that ISO file to a physical CD if you want, and put that in your physical server's CD DVD drive and perform the installation from there. If you're testing out ESXi in a lab environment, maybe you're running it inside Workstation or Fusion, you can simply mount the ISO directly from the Fusion or Workstation interface. Finally, if you want to do a mass deployment or you plan to do a mass deployment of ESXi, you can use the new vSphere 5 Auto Deploy feature, which would take the ISO file and allow you to do a mass deployment of ESXi over the network. In our case, I've got a registered license of VMware ESXi, so we'll go over to the download site and I'll show you exactly which file you need to download so that we can start the installation. Here I am at vmware.com/download. This is the VMware download site. If we go down here, the very first file that I can download is ESXi image, which is actually VMware ESXi. It includes the VMware tools, and as you can see, it's 321 megabytes, and it is an ISO file. That's actually the link you click on right there. But let me scroll down a little bit so you can see some of the other files available from this site. Like I said, the first file is the ESXi image. It's the ISO file. Notice that it says it requires a 64-bit capable server, and that's what you would use to either perform a brand new clean installation or to upgrade to ESXi 5 from, let's say, ESXi version 4 or 4.1. There's also an ESXi offline bundle. This offline bundle would be used with VMware Update Manager to actually deploy VMware tools out to ESXi servers. And it's also used with VMware Auto Deploy, like I was talking about, which can be used to do a mass network-based installation of VMware ESXi. There's also other files available from this download site, such as the vSphere Management Assistant. That's a Linux-based virtual appliance that's used to manage your ESXi servers. Here you can also download the VMware vCLI, which is a command line tool that would allow you to administer ESXi servers from Windows. Moving on down, this is the same place where you download VMware vCenter Server, as well as the vCenter Server Appliance. That's the appliance-based version of vCenter that's new with vSphere 5. Of course, we have lessons later in this series on installing both vCenter Server in Windows, as well as the vCenter Server Virtual Appliance. Additionally, you can download the VMware vSphere client from this interface, or I'll show you how to download it through an ESXi or a vCenter server later in this lesson. Now in my case, I've already downloaded the ESXi installation file. That's the 320 megabyte ISO file that you see right here. In fact, let me show you the file in my download directory. Here's the download directory where I store the ESXi installation image. You can see the name of the file here is VMware VMvisor installer 5.0. So that's ESXi version 5.0. This is the build number here, the 381646. Your build number will likely be very different because over time, as they release more and more bug fixes or patch levels to it, that build number increases. It runs on the x86 architecture, and this is the 64-bit image. There is only a 64-bit image, but that just happens to be in the file name. Notice that it is an ISO file, and it's around 321 megabytes as the download site specified. And if we look on the left-hand side here, there's actually a little icon next to this ISO file because I have one of those DVD burning packages installed where I can actually right-click on this and I could go down and I can open it with Power2Go, which just happens to be the name of the program on my local computer that came with the system when I bought it. And I could use that to burn this to a physical CD image. I could take that image and then insert it into my physical server and perform the installation that I'll show you from there. So if you're planning to install ESXi on a physical server, I recommend that you now go and do that because you'll need that CD image. You'll have to insert the CD into the physical server, boot the server up. You may need to press like escape to get to a boot menu where you can select which device you want to boot from in case the CD drive is not at the top of the boot order. So you would want to boot from the CD drive, and then you can start the installation that I'll show you here in just a second from there. Now in my case, because video recording the console of a server where you're installing ESXi is difficult, I'm actually going to be installing ESXi in Workstation for the purposes of this demonstration. That's one way to try out ESXi in a lab environment, but of course you cannot use it in any way for production. So before I do that, let's go back to our slides where I want to cover the ESXi installation steps. Here are the 6 steps that you'll follow to install ESXi server onto a physical host. Of course, like I said, number 1 is you'll burn that ISO image to a CD and you'll put it in the CD drive of your physical server. You'll want to make sure that VT is enabled in the server BIOS before you start the installation. That's really easy to do. Go into the server BIOS configuration and there'll be a checkbox in there or a menu option to enable or disable Intel VT or AMD V. From there, you'll boot the CD, and like I said, you may need to select the boot menu or use the boot menu if the boot order doesn't specify to boot from the CD drive before the hard drive. From there, you'll answer the installation questions, reboot, and then you'll be ready to use ESXi. You'll perform the initial configuration, which I recommend, and then connect to that ESXi server with the vSphere client. Now, I'm about to show you these steps starting with step number 4. I've already inserted my ISO image or my CD into the drive, and then I'll show you what it looks like to boot up the server. We'll answer all the installation questions, we'll reboot it, we'll perform the initial configuration, download the vSphere client, install it, and then connect to the ESXi server using the vSphere client to prove that it's all working. So now let me go over to my server console where we'll start the ESXi 5 installation. Okay, I was booting up my physical server here on the console where I've already inserted my ESXi installation CD. And I quickly hit the escape key because on this server, that brings up the boot menu. So this server wasn't programmed to automatically, with the boot order, boot from the CD-ROM drive first. So I had to hit escape to go into the boot menu. So I'll just go down here to the CD-ROM drive and I'll press enter. On your server, however, the boot order may be different and it may just automatically boot up from the CD-ROM drive. And then what very quickly comes up is the ESXi 5 standard boot menu. So this boot menu is the very first thing you see when you boot from the ESXi 5 installation media. And if you don't do anything, it'll automatically go into the ESXi 5 standard installer. Otherwise, you could use the arrow keys here to go up or down and select to either manually use the installer or to boot from the local disk. You can also press tab to edit options here, but that's really more of an advanced topic. If you don't do anything, you just let it sit here, it will automatically boot the standard installer. So that's what I'm going to do is I'm going to press enter to boot the installer and get started installing ESXi. And then at this point, we're loading the installer. We haven't started installing ESXi yet. We're just loading the files we need to start the installation process. And now we get to see something that looks more like the ESXi console. You see here it says VMware ESXi 5.0, VM kernel release. There's the build number, tells us about our CPU platform and the amount of memory that this physical server has. If this is a physical server, right there where it says VMware Inc., VMware Virtualization Platform, you would see the name of the physical server. So it'd be like Dell, HP, IBM, or whatever brand name server you have. And now it says, welcome to the VMware ESXi 5.0 installation. It says that ESXi installs on most systems, but only systems that are on VMware's compatibility guide are supported by VMware. It references the VMware compatibility guide there that we've already been to, and here we can just press enter to start the installation process. After we accept the end user license agreement, it scans for available devices, these are actually our hard drives, to install ESXi on. At this point, the installer has found a local volume, a local disk for us to install ESXi on. Your local disk is going to look slightly different from this. You could have a local SATA disk, a SCSI disk, and you could even have a remote disk. You see on the line below that where it says remote none, you could actually have a remote disk. Let's say if you're using a fiber channel or an iSCSI hardware initiator and you're connecting to a remote SAN volume to install ESXi on. In most cases, it'll be a local volume, but it won't be a VMware branded volume. It'll be the brand of hard drive that you're using on your physical server. We could hit F1 here to get some information about the hard drive. Let's say we have multiple local volumes and we're not sure which volume to install ESXi on. This might give us some more specific information about the LUN and target ID numbers, as well as if any VMFS volumes are already stored on that local disk. You don't want to accidentally overwrite an existing VMFS volume. I'll just hit enter here, and then I'll just hit enter to take the default and install ESXi on my only local volume that's available. We're asked to select a keyboard layout. In my case, being in the United States, I'll just take the default keyboard layout. That's going to work quite well. And this is actually something new in the installation process of ESXi 5. Here it asks for a root password. We have to specify the root password at installation time. Previously with ESXi 4 and 4.1, once the system was completely installed, you'd log in with a blank password, and then you could change the password from there. So in our case, I'll just type in my root password, and then I actually have to press the down arrow key here. Strangely enough, the tab key doesn't work. It tells me that the root passwords match, and then I can hit enter to go to the next step. And here we have one final warning before we officially start the installation of ESXi 5. It's telling us that the hard drive we selected ESXi to be installed on will be repartitioned and wiped clean. That's great. We already checked out that disk and we know that's where we want to install ESXi. You may or may not get this hardware virtualization warning. In my case, it hasn't been a problem and I can just ignore it. So all we need to do is to press F11 to start installing ESXi. While the installation of ESXi is very quick, I'm talking just a few minutes, I'm going to pause the video recording and I'll be right back as soon as the installation has completed. As you can see, the installation of ESX5 has been successful. It says that ESXi will operate in evaluation mode for 60 days by default. That means that you don't have to actually license it for up to 60 days. But after that time, VMware ESXi will cease to function unless you register and purchase a VMware product license. It tells us to administer our new ESXi server, we can use the vSphere client or the Direct Console User Interface, or the DCUI. That's what we'll be using to perform the initial configuration of our ESXi server. We need to remove the installation disk before we reboot our physical server, if the boot order would automatically boot that CD-ROM drive before the hard drive. And now it tells us we can press enter to reboot the server and start our brand new fresh install of ESXi Server 5.0. After a quick reboot, ESXi is now booting from the hard drive. This will take just a second here and we'll have our new ESXi server up and running. Alright, the new ESXi server has successfully booted, and you can see here it says that you can download tools and manage this host from, and it gives you the IP address. In this case, it received it via DHCP and it's 10.0.1.14. On the bottom left of the screen there, you can see you can press F2 to customize the system or view logs, or press F12 to shut down or reboot the server. Let's go ahead and go back to our slides now and let's review the installation tasks that we need to perform. With step number 4 completed to perform the ESXi install and reboot the server, we can now move on to step number 5, which is to perform the initial configuration before we connect to the server using the vSphere client. While none of these initial configuration steps are absolutely required just to create a new virtual machine and power on that virtual machine, I highly recommend you perform these steps to ensure that you don't run into problems down the line. Basically, what we'll do here is to log into the DCUI, or the Direct Console User Interface. That's the interface you see directly on the physical server console. We'll configure a static IP address instead of the default of a DHCP dynamic IP address, configure the subnet mask, default gateway, DNS servers, the host name for the server, and then the domain that that server is going to belong to. And then, assuming that this is an enterprise infrastructure with a DNS server, you'd want to add all of your ESXi servers and your vCenter server to the DNS infrastructure so that you can reference them by name as well as IP address. Optionally, you can configure NTP on the ESXi server, you can connect the ESXi server to a SAN, configure lockdown mode, enable tech support mode, and even remote tech support mode. The optional steps there listed in number 5 are all things that we'll be performing throughout the course in future lessons. In this lesson, I'll log into the ESXi server, configure the static IP address, and then I'll show you how to enable a couple of things like tech support mode and remote tech support mode that can be used in future lessons, where I'll show you how to configure an ESXi server from the command line. Here on the Direct Console User Interface of this server, I'm just going to press F2 to log in. It says that authentication is required. And here, new in ESXi Server 5, of course, the root password was configured at the installation time. So I'll enter that password instead of just pressing enter like I would have with a brand new installation of ESXi Server 4. Here inside the Direct Console user interface, you can configure the root password, which we've already done. You can configure the management network, which is where I'll go in just a second and configure a static IP address and give the server a host name. You can restart the management network, test the management network to ensure that the settings that you're using are correct and that the server's host name has been successfully added to the DNS infrastructure. You could go back and restore network settings. You could configure the keyboard. You could go into troubleshooting options, which is where you'll find the tech support mode and remote tech support mode, view system logs, view support information, and even reset the system configuration back to the defaults. In our case, the main thing I want to do here is to go in and configure the management network. So what I'm doing here is using the arrow keys to go up and down and then pressing enter when I find a menu selection I want to use. I'll press enter on configure management network, and then I can press enter here on the network adapters. Now we just have one network adapter on this server, and notice that there's an X next to it right there. That tells us that that network adapter is enabled to be used by this server. You can also see the status there that it's connected. That means it has a physical network link. So that link light on the back of the server, the ESXi host is talking to the network adapter and it knows that it has a network link back to the switch. I'll press escape to go back one level here. And then if you are using VLANs, this is where you can configure those. But we're going to go into the IP configuration. I'll press enter on that and then go down here to set static IP address and network configuration. I'll press the space bar there. I'll use the arrow key and go down. And here I'll configure a static IP address. This is going to be ESX server number 3 in my infrastructure. So I'm going to change that to 10.0.1.13. That'll actually be the static IP address. This subnet mask and this default gateway work just fine in my infrastructure. I'll press enter here. And notice how we changed the IP address on the right-hand side. And now it says it's using a manual IP configuration. I'll go down to the DNS configuration, and the primary DNS server in my case is going to be 10.0.1.20, and then I want to set a host name for this server. It's going to be esx3.wiredbraincoffee.com. Alright, so we changed the host name, we changed the domain. Let's double check the custom DNS suffix. Again, this should match your domain. In our case, it's wiredbraincoffee.com. And at this point, those are all the network settings I want to change. So I'm going to press escape to go back one level. And here it gives us the option to apply the changes and restart the management network. If you say no, the changes that you made won't be applied. So you really need to say yes here. But that also means that the management network for this server is going to be restarted. So this isn't something you want to do on a live production server. Of course, in our case, this is a brand new server. So it really doesn't matter. There's no end users, nothing going on here. I'll say yes with a Y, and it brings us back to the main menu. And here we can see the host name change has been made. It's ESX3. There's the IP address, and we should be in business. We can go down here and we can also test the management network. If I press enter, it's going to do a ping of the default gateway, the DNS server, and then it's going to attempt to resolve its own host name. That's a great test to perform if you're having any network problems with an ESXi server, assuming you can get access to the Direct Console user interface on the server. If I press escape there, we can go on down, and here we can go into troubleshooting options. This is where we can enable the ESXi shell. The ESXi shell is really the tech support mode, and really what it is a command line interface on the physical server console. That's tech support mode, or the ESXi shell. And then we can also enable SSH, which is called remote tech support mode. So all we have to do on these is press enter like that, and we've enabled remote tech support mode, or the SSH server. You would then use an SSH client to connect to the ESXi server so that you could administer it from the command line. And then the same thing here for tech support mode, which says enable ESXi shell. I'll press enter on that. Now it changed to disable ESXi shell, and you see on the right hand side it says ESXi shell is enabled. And that's how we enable the local command line interface and the remote command line interface over the network on an ESXi host. That's not something that's required to do when you first install the server. It's just something that I typically do because I have experience and I want to make sure that that remote tech support mode and local tech support mode are always available for me to use if there's a problem and I can't access the graphical interface. For more information on administering ESXi from the command line, watch my lesson on that topic later in this course. Now I'll press Escape to go back one level. I'll press Escape to go back one level again and actually log out of the server. And now notice the difference here. It says you can download tools to manage this host from http://esx3 or 10.0.1.13, which is the newly configured static IP address for our ESXi server. And that's actually what we're going to use to download the vSphere client so that we can manage this new ESXi server with the graphical interface. Back here at our slides, we went through step number 1 where we logged in with F2 and the root password. We configured our static IP address and other network-related settings. If you haven't already, you should go to your DNS server and you should add this ESXi server as well as your vCenter server that you'll be installing later in the course so that you can contact those servers by network name as well as by IP address. Now let's move on and talk about installing the vSphere client. With vSphere 5, the vSphere client is available in either the traditional Windows version or a new web-based version. However, only the Windows version offers 100% of the features that you'll need today as a VMware admin. The vSphere client is now downloaded directly from VMware.com, although you can go to an ESXi host or a vCenter server to direct you there. The vCenter client is also found on the vCenter server installation media. The hardware requirements to run the Windows version of the vSphere client are relatively low. Just about any workstation, desktop, or laptop that you would use today will work just fine to run the vSphere client. The Windows version will require that you install the .NET client if you don't already have that installed, and the web-based version of the vSphere client will require you to install Adobe Flash. I've got another lesson in this course that covers how to install and use the new vSphere web-based client. So in this lesson, I'll be showing you the traditional Windows-based vSphere client. To get started with the installation, I've opened up my web browser here, and I'm just going to type in the name of the new ESXi server using the domain name that I added to my DNS server. This is the standard security warning here. I'll say that I want to add an exception for this host. I'll confirm the security exception. And then this is the home page for the new ESXi server that we just finished installing. Notice here that we can download the vSphere client. That's what I'll do in just a minute. But also notice that you can download VMware vCenter. That'll actually take you to VMware's website where you'll need a license to download vCenter, or of course you could use the 60-day evaluation. Here you'll also find a link to the VMware documentation. You can download the VMA virtual appliance or the Windows-based VMware command line interface. You can browse the data store that's locally on this ESXi server through the web or find out information about the web SDKs. Those are the APIs or the programmatic interfaces for VMware ESXi and vSphere. In our case, we'll just download the vSphere client. I'll say that I want to save the file. With the download complete, I'll double-click the installation file. And now it asks us to select a language for the installation. In my case, I'm just going to select English here in the United States and say OK. And then this starts the vSphere client installation process. At this point, we get a welcome to the installation wizard for the VMware vSphere client version 5.0. I'll click Next here. I'll accept the end user license agreement. And now we're prompted to enter our customer information. I'll just type in my name here, and then our organization, wiredbraincoffee.com. I'll click Next here. We'll accept the default installation for the vSphere client and program files, VMware, infrastructure, and then click Install to begin the installation process. And there we go. The installation of the vSphere client has been completed. I'll just click Finish here. And now we can go down to our Start menu, and then into All Programs, and down to VMware, where you'll find the new VMware vSphere client. I'll click on the vSphere client there, And then this brings up what you traditionally see when you start the vSphere client. In our case, we can connect to our ESX server by hostname here since we entered it in our DNS, and then we can log in with the default root and administrative password that we set. You can also use your Windows session credentials here if you're using the vCenter server, or if you've configured your ESXi server to use Active Directory authentication. Note that you would have also had to have logged in with your Windows domain credentials in order for those servers to pull your credentials and authenticate you when logging into the local ESXi server or the vCenter server. In our case, we'll just use the default root and the administrative password that we configured for root and click Login. This is the standard certificate warning that you see when you first connect to a new ESXi server or vCenter server. I traditionally check the checkbox right here that says install this certificate and do not display the security warning again for this host or vCenter server. So I'll click ignore here. And here we've successfully connected to our new ESXi server. Many people start at the home screen inside the vSphere client. If we go to the home screen right here, you can see when you directly connect to an ESXi server, you have a very limited set of icons on the home screen. There's just a few things you can do. You can go into the host and virtual machines inventory. You can go into administration and edit the roles or look at the system logs. And then if you have any applications that may have been installed for the vSphere client, those would be down here. However, by default, you won't have any applications. So this VMware Data Recovery icon just won't be there. You'll just have the three icons up here. But most people spend their time in the host and virtual machines inventory. So when you directly connect to an ESXi server, at the top here, you'll have that server, and then below that, you'll have the virtual machines that you've created on that server. On the Summary tab for the server here, you'll have information about the brand or the manufacturer of the server, the model of the server, the number of CPUs, the processor type, the status of the vSphere license, number of processor sockets and cores, number of network interface cards, virtual machines, and templates that have been created on that server, and then any vSphere features that have been enabled as well. On the right-hand side, you get a quick summary about the resource status on that server, information about CPU and memory utilization, information about data store capacity and available free space on the data stores that are connected, and then information about the virtual networks that have been connected or created. So this summary tab gives you a quick overview of what's going on this particular ESXi host. Across the top here, you get information about the version of ESXi that's been installed with the build number. And then, of course, you can see here that we're being alerted that this is still in evaluation mode with 60 days remaining in that evaluation. Now, if you just had a single ESXi server, you could actually use the free license, which would give you a limited set of features, but you could use that free license indefinitely. However, most people are going to go and purchase a license for vSphere so they can take advantage of advanced features. Those licenses could be entered directly on the ESXi server inside the configuration tab here, but I would say that 90% or more of most businesses out there are using vCenter, and that's their central license repository. So all licenses are stored on the vCenter server, and then whatever ESXi hosts are added or removed from the virtual infrastructure, vCenter is responsible for assigning a license to those particular servers. If we go across the tabs here on the top, you can see there's a tab for any virtual machines that we create. Here we could see the name, status, and utilization of those particular virtual machines. We could take a look at resource allocation here if we're using resource pools. We could look at performance reports, information about CPU, network, storage, and disk. We could go into the configuration tab, and honestly, this is where most people spend their time. They're either going in here to configure something specific, they're over on the summary tab, or they're over here in the virtual machine inventory where they might go and right click and create a new virtual machine, shut down a host, restart a virtual machine, or go to the console of a particular virtual machine. So in this configuration tab, you have hardware configurations and software configurations that can be performed. You can go in and configure the networking for this particular ESXi host, configure storage adapters so that you could connect, let's say, to an NFS or an iSCSI SAN. You could go down here and add a license for this particular ESXi server. You could configure the network time protocol or NTP on this server to ensure that the date and time are always correct. That was one of my optional but highly recommended steps that you perform on each ESXi server. You can check out the DNS and routing configuration here and so forth. Also of importance is the recent task window down on the bottom here, which can be hidden by clicking on task right there. This recent task window will show you anything that's happening right now on this particular ESXi server or anything that has recently happened. You can also go into the events tab here to see what might have happened on this server and the status of those events. You can think of this really as the system log. So in summary, that's the vSphere client. We successfully installed our ESXi server, configured it, downloaded the vSphere client, installed the vSphere client, and connected to our new ESXi server. So with that, let's go back to our slides. And that brings us to the conclusion for this lesson. We started off by talking about what ESXi is. It's the hypervisor that installs directly on your physical servers. It acts as the operating system. It's the part of vSphere where the virtual machines will be created and run. It's very important that you're familiar with the installation requirements for ESXi because it is like an operating system and it is running directly on the physical servers. You need to make sure that you check out the VMware compatibility guide to ensure that your physical servers and the components inside will be compatible with ESXi. From there, I quickly talked about what happened to ESX server. That was the version of ESX that contained the service console. That's a Red Hat Linux-based special virtual machine that has privileges to administer that particular ESX host. New with vSphere 5, ESX server has now been discontinued and we only have ESXi. Still, ESXi is fully functional, it's thinner, it's lighter, and it's more secure. From there, I showed you how to download VMware ESXi, and then I walked you through the installation steps. You may need to burn it to a physical CD to put that in your server and boot up ESXi. The installation is quick and easy. You just have to answer a few questions. After we installed ESXi, I walked you through the initial configuration where we went to the direct console user interface. That's the interface that you see directly on the server console where you can perform basic configurations like the IP address configuration, setting the root password, and enabling tech support mode. From there, we downloaded the vSphere client and installed the vSphere client, then proved that we could successfully connect to our ESXi server and manage it directly without using vCenter. Now that we have our ESXi server installed, future lessons will show you how to use vCenter to manage not just one ESXi server, but a whole virtual infrastructure of ESXi hosts. Thanks for watching this lesson covering installing VMware ESXi version 5.